The night was colder than usual on the frozen planet. The winds howled outside, carrying sharp flakes of ice that hit against the walls of Elias's lonely cabin. Inside, the fire in the old iron stove burned low, giving only a faint glow. Elias sat by the table, his hands rough from years of hard work, his gray hair falling over his forehead. He lived alone, far away from any city, far away from the noise of people. He had grown used to silence. But tonight, something was different. The wind carried not only the sound of storm but something else. At first Elias thought it was only his imagination, a faint tapping almost like knuckles against wood. He frowned, stood up slowly, and walked to the door. His boots were heavy against the floor. The tapping came again, weak, almost desperate. Elias opened the door and the storm pushed inside, ice cutting against his face. And there, standing in the snow, were two small figures. They were thin, trembling, their skin a pale shade of blue that almost glowed in the moonlight. Their eyes were huge, bright, and filled with fear. Their hair, white as snow, hung wet and tangled over their faces. They looked like children, but not human children. Elias froze for a moment, unsure if he was dreaming. The storm roared around them, and still they stood there, their tiny hands holding each other tightly. The older one, maybe 10 years old, stepped forward. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Elias did not think twice. He pulled them inside, closing the heavy door behind him. The cabin shook as the storm pressed against it, but now the children were safe from the cold. They stood near the fire, shivering, their clothes torn and covered with frost. Elias quickly threw more wood into the stove, the fire rising higher. "Sit," he said, his voice rough but kind. He pulled out 2 old chairs and the girls obeyed, watching him with wide, unblinking eyes. He could see how thin they were, how their hands trembled not only from the cold but from hunger. Elias went to the kitchen shelf and found what he had left, a small loaf of bread and a pot of soup. It was not much, but it would have to do. He poured the hot soup into bowls and placed the bread on the table. The smell filled the room, warm and gentle. The girl stared at the food as if it was a treasure. The younger one reached out first, then stopped, looking at her sister. The older one gave a small nod and they both began to eat. They ate fast, their hands clumsy as if they had not touched food in days. Elias sat across from them, watching silently. He thought about asking questions. Where did you come from? Why are you alone in the storm? What are you? But something in their faces stopped him. They were only children. They did not need questions now. They needed warmth. They needed safety. The younger girl finished her bread and looked at him. Her eyes, large and shining, seemed to speak without words. She whispered softly, her voice strange but clear. "Thank you, Father." Elias felt a shock run through him. Father. It had been many years since anyone had called him that. He had lost his own family long ago on a mining colony far from here. Since then, he had chosen this lonely life. Yet now, 2 strange children sat before him, calling him father. He smiled faintly, hiding the pain in his heart. "Eat more," he said, placing another piece of bread on her plate. The storm outside grew louder, but inside the cabin there was peace. The fire crackled, the bowls were warm, and the girls slowly began to relax. The older one even gave a small smile, her sharp teeth glinting in the light. Elias noticed, but he did not fear. He had seen many things in his life. These children were different, yes, but they were also fragile. They needed him. As the night went on, the girls grew sleepy. Elias gave them blankets and set up a small bed near the stove. They lay down together, still holding hands. Their breathing slowed, their faces calm. Elias sat nearby, watching over them. He wondered if he had made a mistake. What if they were dangerous? What if someone was searching for them? But then he looked at their peaceful faces and his doubts faded. No matter what they were only children who needed help. He whispered to himself, "As long as I'm alive, you'll never be hungry again." The storm outside raged on, but inside the cabin a promise was made. Elias did not know that this night would change his life forever. He thought he had simply given two starving girls a warm meal, but in truth, he had stepped into something far greater, a story that would echo across the stars. The morning after the storm was quiet. A pale sun rose over the frozen hills, painting the white landscape in silver. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned down to soft embers. Elias stirred, awake in his chair, his old back aching from sleeping upright. He blinked and turned his head. The two girls were still there. Wrapped in his blankets, they slept close together on the small bed he had made near the stove. Their hands were locked together, even in sleep. Their faces looked calm now, but the faint glow of their skin made them seem unreal, like living statues carved from ice. Elias rubbed his beard and whispered to himself, "So it wasn't a dream." He moved slowly, careful not to wake them. He boiled water and brewed tea, the sharp smell filling the cabin. Soon the girls stirred, their silver hair falling over their faces. They blinked, stretching like tired kittens. The younger one yawned, her strange teeth showing again, sharp but small. Elias smiled. "Morning." The girls stared at him silently, still half asleep. Then the older one whispered a word. Her voice was soft, but her accent strange, as if she had learned language from somewhere far away. "Father." Elias froze for a moment. He wanted to correct her, to tell her he was not their father, but the word came out so naturally, so full of trust, that he could not bring himself to say it. He only nodded. "You hungry?" he asked. They nodded quickly, eyes wide with hope. Elias cut slices of bread and warmed the rest of the soup from last night. He placed the bowls before them. The girls ate slowly this time, still hungry but less desperate. Their manners were awkward, their hands clumsy, but they watched each other carefully, copying small movements. Elias noticed this and realized they were learning. As they ate, Elias spoke gently. "What are your names?" The older one paused, frowning, then touched her chest. "Lyra," she whispered. The younger one pointed to herself. "Celine." Elias repeated the names, making sure he said them correctly. "Lyra, Celine." He gave a small nod. "Good names." The girls smiled for the first time. Their teeth made the smile sharp, but their eyes softened, filled with light. Days passed. The storm outside ended, but the snow was still deep, making travel impossible. Elias stayed with the girls, sharing food, keeping them warm, teaching them little things. He showed them how to stack wood for the stove, how to stir soup so it did not burn, how to wash their hands in melted snow. They learned quickly, copying every motion. Sometimes Elias caught them whispering in a strange language he did not know. The words were like music, soft and flowing. When he asked, they only smiled and shook their heads. Elias did not push. He could see they carried secrets, but he respected them. One evening after dinner, Celine pointed at the window. The sky outside was full of stars. She pressed her small hand against the glass, her eyes wide. "Home," she whispered. Lyra pulled her sister back quickly, her face serious. She shook her head, as if warning her not to say more. But Elias had already heard the word. "Home," he said. Nothing but his mind turned. Their home was not here, not on this frozen rock. They had come from the stars. Elias stayed quiet, but in his heart, he felt something stir. These children were not ordinary, yet they trusted him, and he, a lonely, old man, began to feel something he had not felt in years, a purpose. One night, as the firelight flickered on the wall, Celine crawled into his lap. Her skin was cold, but she pressed close, eyes heavy with sleep. "Don't leave us," she whispered. Elias's throat tightened. He placed a rough hand on her silver hair. "I won't," he promised. Lyra watched from the bed. For the first time, Elias saw her lower her guard. Her eyes, sharp and glowing, softened. She gave him a small nod, as if accepting him. From that night on, the bond was sealed. The villagers, however, began to notice. Some had seen Elias walking with the girls near the frozen river. Rumors spread. "Strange children," they whispered. "Not human." Some said they were spirits of the ice, others claimed they were cursed. A few even warned Elias to stay away from them, but Elias did not care. When the villagers asked, he only said, "They are under my roof. That makes them mine." The days grew brighter as winter loosened its grip. The girls grew stronger. They laughed more, their voices filling the cabin with a warmth Elias had never known. He even taught them to read a few human words from an old book. They struggled, but their excitement made him smile. Still, there were moments that unsettled him. Sometimes late at night, he would wake and see Lyra standing by the window, staring at the stars. Her lips moved, whispering words in her strange language. Her glowing eyes looked far away as if she could see beyond the sky itself. Elias never asked what she saw. He only knew one thing. These girls were not accidents. They had come here for a reason. But for now, they were his family. And, for the first time in 10 years, Elias did not feel alone. The last of winter melted slowly. The frozen rivers began to move again, and patches of earth appeared under the snow. Elias's cabin no longer felt so cold. Inside, the fire was bright, and the sound of laughter often echoed from the small room. Lyra and Celine had changed. They were still thin, still strange with glowing skin and silver hair, but they no longer looked like lost orphans. Their cheeks carried color now, and their eyes, once filled with fear, now carried light. Elias felt pride when he watched them read clumsy words from his old books or when they tried to cook soup without spilling too much on the floor. But beneath that warmth, something darker was building. The villagers had not stopped whispering. Rumors spread faster now. Some said Elias had taken in demons. Others said the girls were omens of disaster. A few even spoke of reporting him to the nearest human outpost. Elias ignored them, but he could feel their eyes on him every time he went to town for supplies. One night, as the stars stretched sharp and bright across the sky, Elias woke to a sound. It was not the usual creak of the cabin or the howl of wolves. It was something softer, voices. He rose quietly and followed the sound. Near the window, Lyra and Celine stood together, whispering in their strange tongue. Their glowing eyes reflected the starlight. Elias paused in the shadows, listening. He could not understand the words, but their tone was urgent, almost fearful. Lyra placed a hand on her sister's shoulder. Selena's eyes filled with tears. She clung to her sister tightly, whispering something again and again. Then Lyra turned her gaze toward the stars. Her face was sharp, almost royal, and for a moment Elias felt as if she was no child at all. She was something older, something greater. The next morning, the girls behaved as if nothing had happened. They cooked, laughed, and even asked Elias to tell them stories from his younger days. But Elias could not shake the feeling in his chest. Something was coming. 2 days later, it happened. Elias woke to silence. The cabin felt wrong, empty. He looked at the small bed by the stove. The blankets were still there, folded neatly, but the girls were gone. Their boots, their little scarves, everything he had given them, all missing. Panic gripped him. He ran outside, shouting their names. "Lyra! Celine!" His voice echoed across the frozen hills, but no answer came. The snow crunched under his boots as he searched the river, the woods, even the cliffs. Nothing. Only silence. When he returned to the cabin, his heart heavy, he saw something strange. On the wooden wall near the stove, a symbol had been burned deep into the wood. It was round like a star with sharp lines crossing through it. It glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. Elias touched it carefully, but it was cold. He sat down, heavily staring at the symbol. His thoughts raced. Had someone taken them? Had they run away? Were they even real? The nights that followed were the hardest of his life. For years, Elias had lived alone. He thought he was used to loneliness. But after the girls, The silence felt heavier, unbearable. Every time he looked at the empty bed, his chest ached. Every time he saw their bowls stacked on the shelf, he felt a hole inside him. He tried to convince himself they had only moved on, that maybe they had found their way back home. But the memory of Celine whispering, "Don't leave us," burned in his mind. They would not have left him willingly. And yet they were gone. Weeks passed. Elias worked, hunted, kept the cabin in order. But the spark was gone from his life. He had no reason to smile, no laughter to fill the nights. He found himself staring at the glowing symbol on the wall, wondering what it meant. Sometimes late, at night it seemed brighter, as if calling to something beyond the stars. One evening he sat by the fire with a cup of tea, his hands shaking from age and grief. The wind howled outside, but inside the cabin was quiet. Too quiet. He whispered to himself, "Lyra, Celine, where did you go?" No answer came. Only the crackle of firewood. That night, Elias dreamed. In his dream, he saw the two girls, no longer shivering or small. They were dressed in flowing robes of light, standing on a shining platform among the stars. Their eyes glowed brighter than ever, but their faces were sad. They reached out their hands toward him, but the space between them grew wider and wider. He tried to run to them, but no matter how fast he moved, the distance only grew. He woke with tears on his face. The next morning, Elias made a decision. He carved their names into the wall above the glowing symbol. Lyra, Celine. He pressed his hand over the carving and whispered, "I will not forget." The years would move on. The world outside would change. But Elias carried the memory of those two strange, beautiful children in his heart. What he did not know was that they had not forgotten him either. And one day, far in the future, that promise he made, "As long as I'm alive, you'll never be hungry again," would come back to him in a way he could never imagine. 10 long years passed. The cabin still stood on the edge of the frozen hills, but the man inside was no longer the same. Elias had grown older. His hair, once silver with only a touch of gray, was now almost white. His back was heavier, his steps slower. Life in the wasteland had never been kind, and 10 winters had carved their marks into his body, and yet he endured. Every day he chopped wood, hunted small game, and kept his cabin standing against storms. Every night he sat by the fire and stared at the glowing symbol on the wall. It no longer pulsed as brightly as it once had, but it never faded. Sometimes he touched it, wondering if it had all been real, wondering if Lyra and Celine had only been a dream. But deep in his heart, Elias knew. They had been real. He remembered their laughter, their voices, the way they called him Father Elias. Those memories had carried him through a decade of loneliness. Still, sometimes he whispered to himself, "Why did you leave me?" The world outside had changed too. The frozen planet had grown colder. Rumors drifted through villages of new machines, alien merchants, and hidden wars in the stars. Elias paid little attention. Such things were far from him. Or so he thought. One evening, just as the last rays of the sun bled over the horizon, the ground began to tremble. At first, Elias thought it was only his imagination, or perhaps a small quake. But then the shaking grew stronger. The old cabin rattled, and the cups on his table fell to the floor. He staggered to the door, pulling it open. The air outside was sharp, the sky painted in deep red light. And there, cutting through the clouds, came something impossible. A ship. Not the rusty mining shuttles he had once seen in his youth. Not the clumsy transports the villagers sometimes spoke about. This was a giant, a floating palace of steel and light. Its hull glowed like liquid silver, engraved with symbols Elias could not read. The air around it shimmered as powerful engines slowed its descent. The ship was beautiful, terrible, and utterly alien. Elias gripped the doorframe to steady himself as the ship descended toward his cabin. Snow blew away in great waves as the engines roared. The frozen ground cracked under the weight of the landing gear. The whole valley shook. And then, silence. A ramp extended slowly from the belly of the vessel. Bright light spilled out, so blinding, Elias had to raise his hand to shield his eyes. His heart raced. His breath caught in his throat. He felt like a man standing at the edge of a dream, one step away from something he could not explain. Then, figures appeared. Two tall silhouettes walked down the ramp, graceful as flowing water. As they came closer, Elias saw them clearly. His chest tightened. His eyes stung with sudden tears. It was them. The two girls he had fed 10 years ago, but no longer children. They had grown into women of striking beauty, radiant and otherworldly. Their skin still carried that pale blue glow. Their silver hair shone brighter than the snow. Their eyes were the same, large, luminous, filled with something both alien and deeply familiar. Lyra and Celine. They stepped onto the frozen ground, their elegant robes shimmering in the light. They moved with confidence, but their faces softened the moment they saw him. "Father Elias," Celine whispered, her voice stronger now but still carrying that same warmth. Elias's knees weakened. He gripped the door harder, trying to understand what he was seeing. His voice cracked as he spoke. "Lyra and Celine, is it truly you?" Lyra stepped forward, her tall frame casting a long shadow in the snow. She smiled, and the sharpness of her teeth flashed for only a moment. "It is us. We have come back." Elias's eyes filled with tears. He wanted to speak, to ask where they had been, why they had left, but the words caught in his throat. All he could do was stare at them, two lost children returned as beings of power and beauty. The silence stretched until Celine broke it. She reached into her robe and pulled out a small piece of bread, dry, simple, like the bread Elias had once given them. She held it out with trembling hands. "We never forgot," she said. The old man took the bread in his hands. It was warm, impossibly warm, as if carrying not only heat but memory. Elias closed his eyes, and for a moment he saw them as they had been, two frightened children eating at his table. When he opened his eyes again, they were still there, standing before him in the snow. No longer children, no longer helpless. "Come," Lyra said softly, gesturing toward the ship. "There is much to tell you, much you must see." Elias looked past them at the massive vessel waiting in the valley. Its lights burned like stars, its frame so large it seemed to swallow the horizon. He felt fear, awe, and something else, hope. His life had been long, hard, and lonely. But now, for the first time in 10 years, he felt alive. With slow, heavy steps, Elias left the doorway of his cabin and walked toward the ship. And with each step, the world he thought he knew began to fade away. The ship's ramp glowed under Elias's boots as he stepped slowly inside. For a moment he hesitated, glancing back at his cabin. The old wooden home stood small and lonely against the frozen hills. Smoke still curled weakly from the chimney. It had been his world for so long, his shield against storms and silence. Now it looked fragile, like something from another life. Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder. "Do not be afraid," she said softly. "You are not leaving everything behind. You are walking toward what was always meant for you." Her words gave him strength, and he followed. The interior of the ship was unlike anything Elias had ever seen. The floor shimmered like polished stone, yet it was warm under his boots. The walls pulsed with soft blue light, as if alive. Strange. Symbols shifted and flowed across the surfaces like water. It felt less like a machine and more like a living palace drifting through the stars. Celine walked beside him, her silver hair flowing like liquid light. She smiled, her glowing eyes fixed on him. "We waited many years for this moment." Elias swallowed hard, his voice low. "Tell me, what are you? What happened after that night?" The sisters exchanged a glance. Lyra nodded, and they guided him into a chamber at the heart of the ship. The room opened wide with tall windows revealing the sky. Stars glimmered above, bright and endless. Elias felt small beneath them. Lyra stood tall, her robe shining in the starlight. "We were never ordinary children," she began. "When you found us, we were running, hiding. Our family was gone, our enemies hunted us, we had nowhere to go, we would have died in that storm." Celine stepped closer, her voice softer, almost trembling. "But you opened your door. You gave us bread, warmth, and a promise. To us, that night was not only survival, it was rebirth. You became our father, even if you did not know it." Elias's chest tightened. His hands shook slightly, but he did not interrupt. Lyra's voice grew heavier, carrying authority. "Our bloodline is not simple. We are daughters of a royal house that spans across the stars. Our kind live in hidden worlds, bound by ancient laws. When our enemies struck, we were cast into exile. We had nothing. No armies, no power, only fear." Celine's eyes glistened. "And then we met you." Elias blinked. He felt as if the air had been knocked out of him. He stared at them, trying to connect the children he had once known to the radiant figures standing before him now. "You are royalty?" he asked slowly, the word awkward on his tongue. "Yes," Lyra answered simply. "But more than that, we are survivors. And you, Elias, are the reason we survived." Celine reached out and held his rough hand in both of hers. Her skin glowed faintly, her touch cold but comforting. "Every day since then we remembered you. Every decision we made, every step we took, your kindness guided us. We learned, we grew, we fought back, and we returned stronger. Because of you." Elias's throat tightened. His eyes blurred with tears. "I only gave you food, a place to sleep." Lyra's expression softened. "Sometimes the smallest gift can change the universe." Silence filled the chamber, broken only by the hum of the ship. Elias stared out the window at the stars, his thoughts spinning. He remembered the nights when he had carved their names into the wall, the years of emptiness that followed. Now they stood before him, tall and strong, speaking of destiny and royalty. He whispered, almost to himself, "Why come back to me?" Celine squeezed his hand gently. "Because family never forgets. Because you saved us when no one else would. And because now, Father Elias, we need you again." Elias blinked in surprise. "Need me? I am only an old man. I can barely lift an axe these days. What could I give to princesses of the stars?" Lyra stepped forward, her eyes glowing brighter. "Not soldiers, not weapons. We have plenty of those now. What we need is something rarer. We need the heart that once saved 2 helpless children. We need the man who gave hope without asking for anything in return." Elias's lips parted, but no words came. His heart pounded. Celine smiled gently. "You taught us what mercy was. You taught us trust. And now, in a galaxy drowning in fear and cruelty, we must teach others. But we cannot do it without you." Elias felt a strange warmth in his chest, something he had not felt in years. A spark of purpose, a reason to stand tall again. He looked from one sister to the other, their faces glowing like stars, their eyes fixed on him with love and respect. You truly see me as your father?" he asked in a trembling voice. Lyra and Celine spoke together, their voices steady and clear. "You are our father, always." Elias closed his eyes. He remembered that night long ago, the storm, the cold, the little hands clutching bread. He remembered the promise he had whispered by the fire. "As long as I'm alive, you'll never be hungry again." When he opened his eyes, tears rolled down his cheeks, but his voice was steady. "Then I will go with you." The sisters smiled, radiant as dawn. Lyra placed her hand on his shoulder, Celine on his other side. Together they turned toward the stars outside. The journey was only beginning. Elias had expected the ship to be strange. He had expected it to be large, powerful, even frightening. But what he saw as Lyra and Celine guided him deeper into its halls was something he could not have imagined. The corridors shimmered with light, glowing gently as if the walls themselves were alive. Patterns of stars shifted across the surfaces, moving like constellations in the night sky. The air smelled faintly of blossoms, cool but fresh, carrying a sweetness that reminded him of spring mornings long forgotten. Elias touched the wall as he walked. It was smooth, warmer than stone, softer than metal. It felt like skin, living, breathing. He pulled his hand back, uneasy, but Celine only smiled. "Our ship is more than a vessel," she explained softly. "It is a guardian, a memory, and a home. It grows with us, just as we grow with it." Elias shook his head, marveling. "I lived my life cutting wood, fixing tools, and patching old roofs. And you? You live inside a star." Lyra chuckled faintly, her voice low. "Not a star, Father Elias, but close." They led him into a wide chamber that opened like a garden, beneath glass. Towering trees with silver leaves swayed in an invisible breeze. Streams of glowing water trickled over smooth stones, filling the air with gentle sound. Strange birds with wings like crystal sang from the branches. Above, the Aiju ceiling showed not metal but sky, an endless vision of stars that shifted as the ship moved. Elias stood frozen, his mouth open. This is inside a ship?" Celine laughed softly, her eyes shining with delight. "Yes, it is our sanctuary. It keeps us strong, and now it is yours as well." He stepped forward slowly, his boots crunching on soft grass. For the first time in decades, Elias felt warmth not from firewood but from living earth beneath his feet. He sank to his knees, touching the soil with shaking hands. "I thought I would never see this again," he whispered. "The green, the life." Lyra knelt beside him, her silver hair falling across her shoulder. "You gave us life when we had none. Now we return it to you." Elias blinked away tears. He had not cried so much in years, but the beauty before him broke something open in his heart. They guided him further. He saw libraries filled with floating crystals that glowed with words and images, archives of worlds beyond his imagining. He saw training halls where warriors moved like dancers, their armor shining with liquid light. He saw rooms of quiet meditation, where voices hummed in languages he did not know but felt in his bones. Everywhere he went, the crew bowed their heads respectfully to him. Some whispered words in their tongue, glancing at Lyra and Celine with reverence. Elias felt out of place in his worn boots and patched coat. "I do not belong here," he muttered. But Celine shook her head firmly. "You belong more than any of them. Without you, none of this would exist." At last, they reached a chamber that opened onto a vast balcony. Beyond it stretched the stars, infinite and burning. The ship floated above the frozen world, its engines humming softly like the heartbeat of a giant. Elias leaned on the railing, staring into the endless dark. His voice was quiet. "I never thought I'd leave that little cabin. I thought my story would end there, in the snow." Lyra stood beside him, tall and steady. "Every story can change, Father Elias. Even at the edge of life, a new beginning waits." Celine slipped her hand into his. "You gave us a chance when no one else did. Now we give you one. Stay with us. See the stars. Live not in silence, but in wonder." Elias's breath trembled. His whole life he had been a miner, a builder, a hermit on a frozen world. He had never dreamed of this. And yet, he felt it calling him, the soil beneath his feet, the stars above, the love in the eyes of these two daughters who were not his by blood but by something far deeper. He turned to them, his face lined, but his eyes alive. "I am only an old man. What use could I be to you?" Lyra's gaze was steady. "You are more than you believe. You taught us kindness. You taught us loyalty. These are rarer than any weapon. In a galaxy full of warlords and kings, we need a father." Celine's voice softened. "We need you to remind us who we are." Elias looked back out at the stars. For a long moment he was silent. Then slowly he nodded. "Then I will stay. I will walk with you, wherever this path leads." The sisters smiled, their faces glowing brighter than the starlight. Together they placed their hands on his shoulders. "Then you are home," they said as one. And for the first time in decades, Elias felt it. Not just warmth, not just survival. For days, Elias wandered the ship, exploring halls that seemed endless. Each turn revealed something new: gardens that never withered, libraries of light, chambers where the walls themselves sang in low, steady tones. Everywhere he went, the crew bowed their heads with respect, whispering the name the sisters had given him, Father Elias. At first, Elias felt unworthy. He was only a man who had given 2 hungry children bread. But slowly, the weight of their words began to sink in. Lyra and Celine were not only leaders, they were symbols to their people, proof that survival was possible even after ruin. And Elias was the heart of that story. Still, something gnawed at him. One evening, Lyra led him to a quiet chamber. From the ceiling hung a sphere of shifting light glowing like a small sun. With a gesture, she expanded it, and the chamber filled with visions. Worlds burned, fleets of ships clashed, entire cities were swallowed by fire. Elias's breath caught. What is this?" he asked, voice unsteady. Lyra's face was calm, but her eyes held sorrow. "The truth. The galaxy is not at peace. Our enemies, the same ones who hunted us as children, have grown stronger. They rise again, and soon they will strike." Celine stepped forward, her voice soft but trembling. "They know we survived. They know we live. And now, they will come for us, for all who stand with us." Elias's chest tightened. The memories of that frozen night returned. The fear in the girl's eyes, the storm pressing against the cabin walls. They had been hunted even then. He had not understood it, but now he saw. "And what do you expect of me?" he asked slowly. "I am no soldier, I am no king." Lyra shook her head. "We do not need another soldier. We need what you gave us long ago, hope." Celine's eyes glistened. "Father, when people see us, they see royalty, power, distance. But when they see you, they will see something greater. They will see the man who gave without asking. They will see proof that kindness can survive even in the darkest places." Elias turned away, staring at the visions of war. Ships burned. Worlds cracked apart. He felt small before it, like a single spark in a storm. And yet, he remembered his promise. "As long as I'm alive, you'll never be hungry again." Perhaps this was only another way to keep that promise. The days passed, and Elias saw more of what the sisters had built. Their people trained, prepared, and whispered his name with reverence. He began to realize that he was no longer just a hermit from a frozen world. He was part of something larger. But with that realization came the twist. Late one night, as the ship drifted in silent orbit, Elias woke to a sound. A low hum, different from the steady heartbeat of the vessel. He rose, walking through the empty corridors until he reached a wide observation deck. Outside, the stars shifted, and from the darkness shapes emerged. Ships, dozens of them. Sleek, sharp, black as void. Their lights burned red like the eyes of predators. Elias felt his stomach drop. Even without words, he knew. These were the hunters, the ones who had chased Lyra and Celine when they were children. And now, after 10 years, they had come again. Alarms rang through the ship, doors sealed, voices shouted in languages Elias could not understand. But then Lyra and Celine appeared at his side, calm but fierce. "They have found us," Lyra said, her voice steady as steel. Celine grasped Elias's hand tightly. "Do not fear. You are not alone anymore." Elias's heart pounded, yet he did not step back. He looked into their glowing eyes, and for the first time in years he felt no doubt. He had lived through storms, through loss, through silence. He had survived everything life had thrown at him. Now he would stand with them. The enemy fleet drew closer, their ships forming a wall of shadows across the stars. The sisters stood tall, robes flowing like fire, their presence commanding. Elias stood between them, no weapon in his hands, only the strength of his promise. The crew looked to him, not as a soldier, not as a king, but as a father. And in that moment, Elias understood. His story was not ending. It was only beginning. The ship rumbled as power surged through its core. Light blazed across the decks and the gardens shook with energy. Elias gripped the railing, the sisters' hands on either side of him. The war was coming. The past had returned. And the man who once gave 2 starving girls a warm meal was about to face the greatest test of his life. The narrator's voice seemed to echo through the stars. He thought he had given them bread, but what they gave him was a destiny beyond the stars, belonging.